She said if you want to marry our sister, then by sacred law first you must understand them. She said if you want to marry our sister, then by sacred law first you must understand them. The letter arrived at the palace gates before dawn. Captain Daniel Cole read it twice, standing in the cold corridor outside the royal quarters, his breath fogging in the air. The seal on the envelope was not the king's seal. It belonged to the Harlow family, a name that carried more weight in this kingdom than most crowns. The letter was short, precise, and absolutely impossible to ignore. It said, "If you wish to pursue the hand of Sira Harlow in accordance with sacred law, present yourself at the Harlow estate on the first day of the new moon. Come alone, come humble, or do not come at all." Daniel had not told anyone he wanted to marry Sira. That was the first problem. He folded the letter carefully and pressed it into the inside pocket of his uniform. 7 years as a royal guard meant he had learned to keep his face still when everything underneath it was moving. He was good at that. He had trained himself to be. But this morning, standing in that cold corridor, staring at stone walls he had stood beside 1,000 times before, something underneath his stillness cracked open just slightly. He had met Sira Harlow 4 months ago at a diplomatic gathering in the east wing of the palace. She had been standing near the window with a glass of water, not wine, while everyone else at the table argued about taxation policy. She had looked at him across the room with an expression that said she would rather be anywhere else, and without thinking he had mirrored it back to her. She had laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one, short and startled like she had not planned to do it. They had spoken for 11 minutes. He had counted later that night, sitting in his quarters, wondering why those 11 minutes felt longer than most years of his life. After that, he had seen her 3 more times, always in formal settings. Always surrounded by her family and his duty. They had never been alone together. They had exchanged no private words, no letters, nothing that could be called a confession. He had not spoken of her to anyone, and yet someone knew. The Harlow estate was a 2-day ride from the palace. Daniel requested leave the following morning, citing personal business. His commanding officer, Colonel Grant Webb, studied him with the kind of eyes that had spent 30 years reading soldiers. "Personal business," Grant repeated, not as a question. "Yes, sir." Grant handed back the leave request signed. He said nothing else. But as Daniel turned to go, the colonel spoke quietly to the empty air in front of him. "The Harlows have buried 2 men who thought they understood what they were walking into." Daniel stopped. "I know, sir." He did not know, but he said it anyway because knowing would not have changed the direction his feet were already pointing. The road to the Harlow estate cut through the Aldenmere Valley, which in late autumn looked like something a painter might attempt once and never try again. The trees had dropped most of their leaves, and what remained clung to branches with the specific desperation of things that had no choice. The sky was the color of pewter pulled tight across the horizon. The wind moved through the valley in long, low pulses. Daniel rode with his collar up and his thoughts low. He thought about the sacred law. Every soldier in the kingdom had been taught about it in the same way every soldier was taught about anything, briefly, in passing, as background. The Harlow family was one of 3 ancient families whose daughters could not be wed without the formal approval of the family council. This was not political. It was older than politics. It went back to a time when the kingdom itself was still deciding whether it wanted to exist. The sacred law stated that any man who wished to marry a woman of the Harlow line had first to be examined. Not his finances, not his title, not his military record. Those things the law implied were beside the point. He had to be examined on whether he truly understood the woman he wanted to marry, not about her, about her. The difference, Daniel thought as his horse's hooves hit the frozen ground, was the entire world. He arrived at the estate as the light was failing on the 2nd day. The Harlow property did not announce itself the way wealthy estates usually did, with gates and crests and deliberate impressiveness. It sat at the end of a long, plain road, surrounded by winter fields, and looked like a place that had decided long ago it had nothing to prove. The house was large but undecorated. Every window was lit. A woman was standing at the front door before he even tied his horse. She was tall, with Sira's dark eyes and none of Sira's quiet warmth. Her arms were crossed. Her expression said she had already made a decision and was waiting for him to figure out what it was. "Captain Cole," she said, not a greeting, a confirmation. "Yes, I'm Nora Harlow." Sira's eldest sister. She looked at him with the focused attention of someone measuring a length of rope. "You're early. Is that a problem? We'll see." She stepped back and let him inside. The entry hall was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something herbal, rosemary or sage. 3 other people were seated in the adjoining room, 2 women and a man, all watching him with different versions of the same careful expression. On the wall behind them hung a framed document in a language Daniel did not read, old script pressed under old glass. Nora stopped in the center of the room and turned to face him. "Before anything else," she said, "I want to be clear about what you are walking into." She gestured toward the framed document. "Sacred law is not ceremony. It is not a test you can study for. It is not a performance." She paused. "It is an accounting." Daniel kept his posture still, his hands loose at his sides, the way he stood when briefings turned toward things that required more than attention. "You will spend the next 3 days here," Nora continued. "You will answer questions. You will listen. You will be observed." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "At the end of 3 days, the council will decide whether you have understood our sister, not whether you love her, whether you have truly seen her." The fire in the corner popped once. "And if they decide you haven't?" Daniel asked. Nora looked at him with an expression that was not cruel and was not kind. "Then you will ride back to your palace and your duty," she said, "and Sira will never know you came." The room held that sentence for a moment. Daniel nodded once. "Then I'm ready," he said. Nora studied him. "No," she said quietly, "you're not, but that is the point." The first morning of the examination began before sunrise. Daniel woke in the small guest room to the sound of someone moving in the corridor, unhurried but deliberate, the way people move in houses they know completely. He dressed in plain clothes as he had been instructed. No uniform, no rank. He had left those things folded on the chair like a skin he was not sure he was allowed to keep. Downstairs, a woman named Clara Harlow, the second sister, was already seated at the long kitchen table with 2 cups of tea. She was softer in manner than Nora, but not softer in the eyes. She pushed 1 cup toward the chair across from her without looking up from the papers she was reading. He sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. The tea was strong. The window above the sink showed a sky just beginning to give up the last of its dark. "Tell me," Clara said, still not looking at him, "what you noticed about Sira the first time you met her." Daniel wrapped his hands around the cup. "She was drinking water," he said. Clara looked up. He kept going. "Everyone else at the table had wine. She had water. She was standing near the window, slightly apart from the group, not in a way that looked unhappy, more like she had chosen it. When the argument at the table got loud, she didn't step away from it. She just became very still, like she was filing it." Clara said nothing. "She laughed once," he said, "at something I did without meaning to, and then she looked slightly surprised at herself for laughing." Clara set her papers down. "Most men who have sat in that chair," she said, "begin with her appearance." Daniel looked at her. "I noticed that too," he said simply, "but you didn't ask about that." Clara picked her papers back up, but not before something passed across her expression, brief and unannounced, like a door opening and closing in the same second. "Finish your tea," she said. "The morning has a long way to go." The questions that followed were not what he expected. He had prepared in the 2 days of writing for questions about his intentions, his income, his character. Standard questions, the kind a man could rehearse. What he got instead were questions about Sira, specific and quiet and relentless. What had she said when the room got too loud? What had she done with her hands when she was thinking? What had she ordered to drink at the second gathering and the third? When she disagreed with something, did she say so immediately or did she hold it? He answered every question. Some answers came easily. Some he had to reach for, surprised to find them there, things he had observed without registering that he was observing. By midday he understood what was happening. They were not testing his feelings. They were testing his attention. The afternoon brought Nora back. She walked with him through the winter fields behind the estate without any introduction to the activity, simply falling into step beside him at the back door and starting to walk. Daniel walked with her. For a long time she said nothing. The ground was hard under their boots. The trees at the edge of the property stood bare and patient. "Sira is the youngest," Nora said eventually. "She has always been the one people underestimate." Daniel listened. "Not because she is quiet. She is not always quiet." Nora kept her eyes on the horizon. "Because she makes the people around her comfortable. She has a way of smoothing the edges off a room. People mistake that for softness." She stopped walking. It is not softness, she said. It is discipline. She has been practicing it since she was 9 years old because the alternative scared her more than the effort. Daniel stood beside her in the cold air. He did not ask what the alternative was. He understood the rule. Drop it, trust it, move. I know, he said. Nora turned to look at him directly for the first time since they had walked out. Do you? She said. He met her eyes. She was scared at the third gathering, he said, not of anything in the room. The ambassador from the northern province said something dismissive about the old families, and the room laughed politely, and Sira laughed too, but 2 seconds after everyone else. She was deciding whether to let it go. Nora was very still. And then she let it go, Daniel said. And the discipline you're describing is exactly what that cost her. I watched her pay it. The wind moved through the empty trees. Nora turned and started walking back toward the house. Day 2 will be harder, she said. He believed her. The second day arrived wearing the specific weight of a test that did not announce itself. He came down to breakfast to find the third sister, whose name was Paula, and the man from the first night, who turned out to be their brother Owen. Owen Harlow was not tall, but he took up a room the way certain people do, through stillness and a kind of compressed attention that made the air around him feel denser. Owen poured coffee and slid a cup across without ceremony. You're a soldier, Owen said. Yes. Sira has never been in a military environment. She does not operate the way you operate. Daniel took a sip of the coffee. I know that. Owen leaned back in his chair and studied him with the slow, thorough attention of a man who had made assessments before that had cost him something. Tell me how she makes a decision, Owen said. Daniel set his cup down. She listens until everyone else has spoken, he said. She doesn't cut in. Even when she has the answer, she waits. When she does speak, she starts from the edges of the problem, not the center. She comes at it sideways. Owen's expression shifted, so slightly that in a less quiet room it would have been invisible. Why? Owen asked. Daniel thought about it. Because she is not performing certainty, he said. She is actually thinking. She wants to arrive at the answer alongside the people she is talking to, not in front of them. Paula, who had been listening with her chin in her hand, made a small sound that was not quite agreement but was related to it. And when she is wrong, Owen pressed. She says so, Daniel said, and she says it without the kind of performance that makes it about her. Just I was wrong, here is what I see now. Owen stood, picked up his cup, and walked to the window. The silence that followed was not empty. It had shape and texture and something moving through it that Daniel could not quite name. My father rejected 4 men, Owen said quietly, still facing the window. Not because they were bad men. 3 of them were decent men by any accounting. He paused. He rejected them because when he asked those questions, they answered about themselves. Everything they said pointed back inward, what they felt, what they wanted, what they pictured. He turned. You answer pointing outward, Owen said. That is not a small thing. Daniel did not let himself react, not because he felt nothing. Because the thing he felt was too large to perform and too important to waste on a reaction. Your father's instinct was right, Daniel said. Owen nodded once. In the afternoon, Paula took over. Paula Harlow was 3 years older than Sira and moved through the world like someone who had learned early that warmth and sharpness were not opposites. She brought Daniel to the library and sat across from him at a reading table with a single candle between them. Sira has a fear, Paula said, that she has never spoken aloud to anyone in this family. Daniel waited. I am going to describe it to you, Paula continued. And then I am going to ask you what you would do. He nodded. Sira is afraid of becoming invisible, Paula said. Not unnoticed. Invisible. There is a difference. She can stand in a crowded room and not be seen, not because she hides, but because she has spent so long making other people comfortable that sometimes there is nothing left in the frame that belongs only to her. The candle between them breathed and steadied. If you marry her, Paula said quietly, that fear does not disappear. It becomes your problem to understand, every day, without her having to name it. What do you do with that? Daniel looked at the candle for a moment. Then he said, I make her take up space. Paula's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. How? She asked. I asked the question she stopped herself from saying. I defer to her in the rooms where she defaults to deferring. I disagree with her sometimes, not to challenge her, but to prove that her opinion has weight that lands. I remind her, not through words but through consistent behavior, that the shape she leaves in a room is not invisible to me, that I am always looking for it. The library was very quiet. Paula blew out the candle. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow you speak with Sira." He had not known that was coming. He lay in the small guest room and stared at the ceiling and felt something pass through his chest that was not quite the word for anything he had a clean name for. Not dread, not relief, something that held both without resolving into either. He had answered every question pointing outward. He had described a woman with the precision of someone who had been paying attention for 4 months without permission and without expectation. He had not romanticized her. He had not reduced her. He had simply reported what he had seen. And now she was in this house. And in the morning he would walk into a room and she would be in it, and whatever happened next would not be controlled by him, by the questions, by the careful architecture of the examination. It would be controlled by the thing that happened when two people who had spoken for 11 minutes stood in the same space again and found out whether those minutes had meant the same thing to both of them. He closed his eyes. Outside, the wind moved through the winter fields, long and low, the way it had moved the entire time he had been here, patient and continuous, like something that had been waiting and was now, finally, close. She was already in the room when he came downstairs. Not performing calm, actually calm, in the way of someone who has had the night to settle into a decision and arrived at morning on the other side of it. Sira Harlow was standing near the window, drinking water. Something in his chest moved, sharp and certain, before he could catch it. She looked at him, not with surprise, with recognition. "They told me you answered every question," she said. He crossed the room and stopped a few feet from her. "They asked good questions," he said. She looked at him with an expression he had memorized from 11 minutes in a palace corridor, the one that lived between humor and something much more serious. "They asked you about me," she said, "as if you knew me." "I know what I saw," he said carefully. "That may not be the same as knowing you," she tilted her head. "Most men would have claimed it was the same." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "Why did you come?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely asking. He thought about the letter arriving before dawn. The road through the valley, the cold corridor where something had cracked open. "Because 11 minutes was enough to know that I wanted more of them," he said, "and because I had the sense that you would not respect someone who came without doing the work first." Sira looked at him for a long moment. "The council voted last night," she said. He waited. "Nora voted no." She said it evenly, no apology in it. "She votes no first, always. She says it is the only honest starting position." He nodded. "Clara voted yes. Paula voted yes. Owen voted yes." The window behind her was full of winter light. "The law requires consensus," Daniel said quietly. "It does." Sira set her glass down on the windowsill. "Nora changed her vote this morning." The room held that for a breath. "What changed her mind?" he asked. Sira almost smiled. She said, "He did not ask what changed her mind when she said you were not ready. He just nodded and got up in the morning anyway." Daniel looked at her. "That's all." "That is everything," Sira said. "Nora does not believe in men who need to be convinced they are not the obstacle. She believes in men who already know it." He was quiet. She picked her glass back up. "So," she said, "you have passed the sacred law." She looked at him with those dark, careful eyes. "Now comes the harder part." He raised an eyebrow. "Harder than 3 days of your family examining whether I actually see you?" "Yes," she said simply. "What's the harder part?" She turned back to the window, to the winter fields, to the bare trees standing patient at the edge of the property. "Proving it every day for the rest of your life," she said. "Without being asked, without being watched. Without a council or a law or a letter arriving before dawn to make it formal." She looked at him over her shoulder. "That part has no ceremony," she said. "It is just a choice, made again and again." He stood in the winter light of the Harlow Library with everything that had brought him there sitting quietly behind him. "I know," he said, and this time he meant it.